what a hard job that person has, I have to say. It's just one of the hardest jobs you're ever going to take, and you never know what's going to happen under your watch. But what a hero. There's heroes in our community, and definitely Erica is one of them. In just a moment, we'll be switching gears and talking about local newspapers and how they've been under attack from wealthy hedge funds who are stripping them for parts. The new film, Stripped for Parts, and one of the subjects of that film, Julie Reynolds, is going to be my guest, along with the filmmaker, Rick Goldsmith. All that coming up on Talk of the Bay right after a couple of announcements.
Have you ever asked yourself, what does being healthy mean really? Is it the absence of disease or a state of optimal function? How can I decide which treatment to choose when presented with a variety of options? How do I maximize my healthy lifespan? You can get answers to these questions and more at Ask Dr. Dawn here on KSQD every Thursday night at 6 p.m.
This is KSQD, Santa Cruz 90.7 FM, KSQT, Prunedale 89.7 and 89.5 FM, and ksqd.org.
Yep, you're listening to Community Radio right here on the Central Coast. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. This is Talk of the Bay, and we're talking about various things that impact our lives. And what is more impactful than the survival of local newspapers? Those of you who live in our area know that our local papers have gone through many changes. They have shrunken their staff. We're going to find out what's behind all that in a wonderful film, which we're going to talk to the makers of, Stripped for Parts, American Journalism on the Brink. And I'm going to start the show with a little bit of a sample of the trailer that the trailer and the movie just aired on PBS. It is now streaming on the web. So let's give it a listen.
Tomorrow will be the final edition of the Rocky Mountain News.
The last decade and a half, we've seen 1,800 newspapers disappear.
The Denver Post isn't dying. The Denver Post is being murdered.
The media is a food chain which would fall apart without local newspapers.
We've been hearing for the last decade or so that newspapers are dying, they're dinosaurs because of the internet. There's this bigger problem. There's an industry that's out to destroy newspapers and doing it deliberately.
Distressed investing is called vulture investing for a reason. They're feeding on a carcass of a company. They want to get in, make some money, and get out.
What hedge funds will tell you is this is creative destruction in capitalism.
We got bought by this mysterious company. Nobody even knew who they were. It was called Alden Global Capital, and it was a New York hedge fund. I said, you're an investigative reporter. Why don't you dig into Alden and just write about who they are and what they're doing, because people don't know.
I work for the bad guy.
That is the voice of Julie Reynolds, who is my guest here on Talk of the Bay. Hi, Julie. It's great to have you on board and back again.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Rachel.
It's been a while. And you're the star of this show. Your reporting led to all this other reporting. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. I want to bring your cohort, the filmmaker of this film, online. Hi, Rick.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, very well.
Okay.
And obviously you can hear me.
And I can hear you.
Great film, just aired on PBS nationwide last week. And I'm wondering if both of you can talk about just what moved you personally to want to be part of this film and to make this film. And I'll start with you, Rick. When did this idea start to fulminate in your brain about making a film about what's happening to our local newspapers?
Well, it kind of plopped in my lap. I was actually talking with Bill Moyers, the great journalist who just died this past summer. And I wanted to do a film on him. And he wasn't going to have any of it, but he knew my work and I knew his, of course. So we decided that we would look into doing a film, somewhat together. And we tossed a few ideas around. Nothing really stuck, didn't go anywhere. And I thought that was the end of it. And so I said goodbye to Bill and figured that was it. And 3 weeks later, I get an email from him and he says, I'm sitting here in the barber's chair and I'm reading this article and I said to myself, this is a film that has to be done. And Goldsmith's just the guy to do it. And it started from there. This was the spring of 2018, and the article was about the Denver Rebellion, which was sparked by an editorial writer who blasted his hedge fund owner of the Denver Post, Alden Global Capital. And that made national news. And I indeed, as Bill thought it was a great story, because here was not only a great kind of conflict, antagonist, protagonist, but journalists who are not usually ones to write about their own industry or their own profession were writing about it and becoming part of the story. And the more I dug into it, I found the people up in Denver who were part of that rebellion. And in short order, it really didn't take very long at all, I found that the source of much of their information about what this hedge fund was about came from Julie Reynolds here in California, reporting on it for her union.
And let's, for the listeners who are familiar with Julie Reynolds, she has been a longtime voice in journalism in the Monterey Bay. We are reaching Monterey County these days as K-Squid. So Julie, your paper, the Monterey Herald, was a scrappy local paper for years. What happened? And how is this connected to the story of other papers being taken down by these wealthy capitalists that are nobody's heard of?
Well, yeah, actually connecting those dots is what got me started on this hunt. I do want to set the record straight. Not the star of the show.
Modest as she is.
The members of the News Guild Journalists Union, I think, are really the stars. Yeah, I was working at the Monterey Herald. We got bought by a mysterious company. Our printing press was dismantled. We lost our building. We moved into rented quarters. Everything got super downsized very suddenly. And I started noticing that was happening to other papers in our chain, and eventually figured out who it was who bought us, and it was this mysterious hedge fund that had incorporated in the Isle of Jersey, which is a notorious tax secrecy haven, and it was called Alden Global Capital. And I ended up taking a voluntary buyout from the Herald because I wasn't able to do the kind of stories I had been used to doing. They said they didn't have the room, they didn't want people spending time doing investigative reporting and that kind of thing. It was more feed the beast.
And let's talk about the kind of stories you were not able to cover and why they are so important to keeping accountable the local dignitaries and politicians that take our tax money and use it.
Well, yeah, and the Herald was great at this. I mean, we had several investigative reporters. We had uncovered pricing scandals with Cal American Water Company. I was covering youth violence extensively. I also covered the criminal justice system and rapid changes that were happening in California at the time. I had just won an award for a story about the youth, the juvenile brain and the development and how it hadn't matured as early as people used to think, and that the justice system hadn't caught up to the neuroscience. And I won a bunch of awards, and my editor held it up to me, and I thought I was going to get a congratulations, and I was told, this is the story the boss says you can't do anymore.
Oh, ow. And that middle person has a terrible job.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. He's a great man, and bless his heart, he is still there doing the good work. But, you know, so I took the voluntary buyout. The union called soon after. I was like, I need a job. And they wanted me to edit a little newsletter for them. I had been a member while I was at the Herald. And it very quickly turned into, wait a minute, why don't we use your skills? We're trying to find out more about this company. And I'm like, oh, don't get me started.
But they
got me started.
they got you started, and you dug into something that was not easy to dig into, because from the movie, it's real clear that these people didn't want people to know. They didn't want the public to know, or other journalists, what they were doing, which was pretty much like your title, stripped for parts. They were buying these distressed organizations and literally wringing whatever they could out of them, right? I'm still curious about the economics of it, why that was even lucrative, but you figured it out yourself as you dug further, because obviously it's not the printing presses that were worth that much.
Right.
there was something else they held that was worth a lot that it took a while to connect dots to, because it was a different company handling it under a shell name. Tell about that story. And Rick, I want to bring you back into this in a minute, so don't go away.
Well, one of the main things, because I noticed that they were selling our newspaper property, they were selling the Mercury News building, they were selling the Santa Cruz Sentinel building, and on and on and on. And I start Googling and found this mysterious real estate firm, and the front page of their website was nothing but our newspaper buildings. It was called 20 Lake Holdings. Soon after they liquidated all of our buildings, they started selling other newspapers buildings, because those are very, a lot of them are older historic buildings in downtowns. Developers were chomping at the bit to buy this real estate. And the other thing that took me a longer time to figure out, because I'm not a financial reporter, is they make money by loading these newspapers that they buy up with debt. So they'll buy a chain like the one that had our Bay Area papers, and the majority of them are in that group. They're in Media News Group. And then they will saddle it with hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. They'll make the company take out loans. They'll use that money to invest in their own businesses and do their own thing and have a great old time. And the company is saddled with that. They never pay back a dime. And eventually they would run it into the ground and either declare bankruptcy or sell it, for bargain basement fire sale prices. What happened with newspapers, though, is that process, and this is called, vulture investing. It's a very specific kind of investing in distressed industries. You buy them cheap, and instead of building them up, you tear them down even more. But there are ways like saddling them with debt where you can personally profit as an investor. And that's what they were doing. And normally it's a 3-year cycle for Alden Global Capital, but they have been doing this now since 2011, 2012 with our newspapers, because they are still making incredible profits from these papers, even as they cut staff, even as they strip off their real estate, make everyone work from home or coffee shops. They are making margins, up to 30%, which is unheard of in most industries.
So yeah, they're schlepping off of all the hard work building these newspapers up in a very challenging time. It's not like everything was going great for newspapers up until the time these vulture capitalists got a hold of these properties. Right. Rick, I want to go back to you. It feels like there's some overarching themes about democracy that have become even more important maybe in the past 5 or 6 months. Can you talk about the importance of local papers and why these particular attacks mean more than just a business decision and people losing their jobs? There's something bigger at stake. And you brought that out well in the film. It seems like the people who talk to you, the journalists, understand their role is to speak truth to power. Could you elaborate on some of what was said in the film about that?
Well, yeah, really, democracy is what's at stake. If you don't have informed people, you can't have people be involved with each other in the institutions. Studies have shown that when newspapers go away in a given city or town or county, voting goes down, corruption goes up, expenses go up, because the insurance companies know that the cities or the counties are kind of on the hook for corruption, for more bad things to happen. So they increase their rates. It's almost counterintuitive that you would think that would make it more expensive to insure a city, but that's the case too. And what we're also finding out now, and I think even more since January 20th, is that the more people don't have that connection to their local newspaper, to news at all, to truthful news, and are subject to misinformation and disinformation, they get disconnected from each other. Newspapers have a glorious, in a way, history going back a few hundred years to tying communities together. There are ways where people from different walks of life, people who own businesses, people who shop at businesses, people who are wealthy, people who are poor, people who are of different ethnic backgrounds, to kind of meet through the newspaper and feel like we are connected.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really losing community after community, but I think that that's what also people are fighting for. Journalists are fighting for it, and people who are concerned with journalism, community people, people who haven't been maybe represented in the legacy papers all that well, poor people, labor, people, minorities, are now saying, hey, we need this. We need this public service journalism. We need this in order to grow as a community and as a people.
And what we saw in film, and I don't want to give away all of it, were these attempts by journalists to reinvent journalism's model, which had been based heavily on advertising, but then that ended up becoming warping the editorial side. As much as people like to think they always had a wall between advertising and editorial, it started to break down with the advent, of more and more money coming into these spaces and the publishers getting wealthy at the expense of the journalists. One thing your film really does a great job of, I think, is educate us about the actual profession of journalism and what it does. A lot of people don't really understand what a local journalist does. They sit for hours in a city council meeting to get one story. And that might seem, boring about what the city council did on Tuesday night, but if you don't know what your local city council, you might be surprised that these giant high-rises went up downtown. And where did those come from? How come nobody said anything? So that's a great service you did in your film. But I want to get to what, toward the end of the film, seems to be a movement or a trend. Some of these papers are still alive, or they're kind of hollowed out, but they're still living. Like our Sentinel has a fraction of the people working there. They're doing the best they can. Thank you, PK Haddis. But it used to have, 30 different beats, and now it has like 3 people. And what's happening is what you're doing with Voices of Monterey Bay, and what other people are trying to do, which is try to get online and just do it ourselves. That's not really replacing the legacy media, though, is it, Julie?
It can. We don't. Voices of Monterey Bay is a micro publication. We call ourselves the Sunday magazine you used to get in your newspaper. We're like that, and bilingual.
But it's great, and you train young journalists.
Yeah,
so
and
don't undersell yourself.
Oh, and I will brag because two of our young journalists just today won the Society for Professional Journalists Awards. We train children of farm workers, people in the Salinas Valley, young kids in high school, to become journalists and become civically involved. We don't even care if they become journalists, just get involved in your community. And for the second time, our kids just won a big award competing against the big Bay Area student publications. So we're very proud of them. And that kind of work is really, really important to communities, even if we're not replacing the paper of record. But there are papers that are doing it. I mean, not papers, but news publications. In fact, I try to stress it's not about the paper. Like, I understand that, dead tree legacy publications may have to go the way of the horse and buggy. That's fine. But we do need robust news gathering and information disseminating organizations.
That are credible. I mean,
that's credible,
the tricky part. Is like
trained, trustworthy. And so we've got Santa Cruz Local, we've got Lookout Santa Cruz, we've got K-Squid, we've got Voices in Monterey Bay. There is a growing and increasingly robust local news environment. And, for one thing, Lookout, I think, is doing a great job of replacing the paper of record in terms of getting those daily news stories out. You want to know what happened today, something happened in your neighborhood. It might be on there, So I think that this movement is in its utter infancy, but the nonprofit and hybrid type, as long as they're independent, credible newsrooms are sprouting up, I think they are giving a lot of hope for the future. And they're also giving voices to communities who weren't part of the mainstream media before, to the LGBTQ plus community. We focus heavily on immigrants and bilingual readers. So, there are groups that weren't represented anyway, so now they're taking that opportunity to rise up. So there are some phoenixes. I don't know the plural of phoenix.
Phenomenon
coming from these ashes.
Well, it's encouraging, and it shows that people don't give up, even though the odds seem quite daunting. In your film, there were a lot of people who had never spoken out at a rally, but got outside of their comfort zone. And in fact, one of them, Rick, you can tell this story. One of them risked their entire job by putting out an editorial saying, hey, our paper's getting taken over, by a hedge fund. Could you talk about that story? That was very inspiring in a way. You don't really want people to have to throw themselves on their own petard just to make a point, but it is sometimes important to take a risk.
Well, Dave Krieger worked for the Daily Camera in Boulder, Colorado, which is about an hour from Denver, so it was part of that same area. And they were also owned by the same hedge fund and this media news group, owned by Alden Global Capital. And he wrote an editorial about what was going on at the Denver Post and at the Daily Camera and how this was affected his community. And that was his job as an editorial writer, to do that sort of thing. And his editor, okayed the editorial, and the publisher didn't. So he decided that he would publish it anyway on his own website, his own blog. And he got fired from it. Unfortunately, the Daily Camera was a non-union paper. The Denver Post was a union paper, so they could protest. They could go to New York and protest, and they weren't afraid to lose their jobs. But as a non-union paper, he didn't have those protections, and he was summarily fired. So I think that episode showed a lot of things. It showed kind of worker solidarity and the journalists all around knowing what an important story this was. This wasn't important because, we work at that paper. This was important because this was a 150-year institution that was the backbone of our community in some way. And if it was any other, as Dave mentions in the film, if it was any other institution like that, we would be all over it. Yeah. So he was doing the job of a journalist, and he would be damned if he was going to stop writing just because somebody told him not to do it. And, for me, one of the joys of making this film was showing these journalists at work. So it might have been somebody like Julie who was investigating this whole thing, or it might be somebody like Dave who was just writing about it, or Tom Peel, who was here in the East Bay. He's now at another news organization, but he was covering police, police misconduct. And you just watched him at work, putting together a story and trying to beat the deadline, and working with his comrade in the news office. So it was kind of my attempt to be All the President's Men, or a Spotlight, these Hollywood films that showed journalism in an exciting light. And I was hoping to do that, and felt like I did it to some extent in this film in Stripped for Parts.
I think you did, and you did an admirable job. Also kind of peeling back the mythology and glamour, and just looking at how hard of a job it is. When you showed the senior journalist trying to train his younger protege, and how hard he was being on him to try to keep the journalistic integrity and ethics and everything in place as he reported, and make sure it was factual. People don't realize, and I'm sure Julie can attest, how much work it is to get it right, and how much little fact-checking goes on behind the scenes to make sure you don't have to print a retraction. We have so many things going by that are just complete lies coming out of major institutions, and the administration itself is kind of a constant stream. It's hard to keep up, I imagine, now with the level of fact-checking needed based on what people are saying rather than doing. And there's a lot of it happening invisible, so we need even more people fact-checking and making sure that there's not corruption happening in government. Julie's been in the trenches for a long time and can attest, but do you think people really know what your job is? Maybe after this film they will know better.
That's my hope, for sure. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because I every time I see this scene with Tom and Nate, the younger journalist, I'm just like so amazed at their dynamics and this natural mentorship and just the rigor of the ethics of journalism. You can really see it at work there. And I do want people to remember that journalism is a public service. You don't have to think of it as the media. There is lots of media out there, but there are also credible news organizations that are providing information that your community needs. And it's really important to remember that. Even if you watch television news, it's probably recycling a lot of news from what was your daily paper or from a local news website of dedicated, ethical, trained journalists. So we still need that. I'm all for citizen journalism, but paid professionals have a place. You need a lawyer or a doctor, you pay somebody who's had some training,
Yeah, and, you wouldn't want your surgeon going, I'm a citizen surgeon.
Right, exactly.
Thank you.
And, yes, we can all report what we see and observe, but, we have years of training of knowing how to read a document, knowing how to get answers to our questions. We don't give up when people don't call us back. We call 25 times if we have to. I don't know how many times I've called Alden Global Capital. They've never, ever. Okay, one time a receptionist answered the phone and hung up on me.
There's a scene, Rick, where someone's trying to deliver petitions to the office, and they won't even let them in the lobby. They escort them out as if they're somehow dangerous. They have a box of 1,600 journalist signatures saying we don't want you owning our paper. We want to buy it ourselves, and they just treated them terribly.
Yes.
Well, I think there's a lot in that scene. One is just the obvious of what you said, that they were so remote, but local ownership is something that is increasingly going away. Hedge funds typically, are spread out, have their headquarters away from the newspapers that they're running. And even the old-time publishers, which, they might have been millionaires themselves and maybe a little bit remote, but they were often, in best-case scenarios, they were of the community. And so they had two goals. They had a goal to make money as a businessman, but they also had a goal to serve the public. And that's what's missing with the hedge fund ownership. Their one single goal is profit. Profit for themselves, profit for the people that are investing in the hedge fund. And public service and journalism is not even on their radar. So they will do anything but, and I think reducing the staff is one of the first things that they do, to reduce their costs. But they don't think twice about reducing the service that they're hacking apart. And the people who are suffering, who are the people who need the news, the people in the community.
The people whose tax dollars are being used in various nefarious ways that they don't even know about. So journalists are the ones ferreting that out. It feels like an inflection point, again, for journalism in general, given that we have an administration hostile to journalists and actually ICE arresting journalists for doing their jobs and pummeling them to the ground. It's even more of a dangerous time in our country to be a journalist, but it's also the most heroic thing you can do to keep on doing what you do in the face of that, and it shouldn't have to be that way. I thought and we're running out of time here, we have about 4 minutes, but there were people at the end of the film, stripped for parts, that talked about a public role, that the public sector could fund journalism as a public good. It's the only function that's mentioned in the Bill of Rights. And so do you see that as a viable thing, that the government would leave its hands off but still fund? I mean, CPB just went away. Yeah. So how is that going to work?
Well, I think it's ironic because at the time we finished this film a couple of years ago, so it was before January 20th. Yeah. And so some of that discussion about public funding of journalism, which, by the way, is happening in certain ways, even through California, Illinois, New York, they have some ways which they're kind of getting through legislation, getting money back from big tech to help journalism. It's a complicated thing that I couldn't discuss in 4 minutes or two. But I think that finding the business model that works is going to be part and parcel of all the work that's being done now in rebuilding, reimagining, reinvigorating journalism, which I think is ultimately going to come from the younger generation because they understand how best to reach their peers. You know, it's the family newspaper. Somebody like myself, you know, I grew up with newspapers in my house since I was a kid, but people don't do that anymore now. So they're going to figure out not only the ways to reach their peers and their community, but the business models that work for them, which probably will be a lot different than they have been over the last 20, 30, and, you know, hundreds of years.
First, we need to have school newspapers in high schools and colleges not be attacked, you know, for publishing op-eds. We need to have journalists supported in those places so they can go be the next generation. I taught in a journalism program at Cabrillo College for years, and, you know, I wanted my students to go on, and several of them have been. But yes, they're going to reinvent journalism in their own way, I'm sure, and hopefully keep the values that have always been there of impartiality and fairness and ethics that journalists have always had. So final words, Julie, what's ahead for you? What's ahead for this story? Have you gotten any calls since it aired? Because you're really in it a lot and featured very prominently.
I have gotten many, many calls.
old high school boyfriend.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't have any of those.
Oh, okay.
I'm good on that. But yes, it's quite amazing now that it's airing on PBS nationally. It's kind of overwhelming a little bit. But when I heard I could come down to my local community station, I said, of course,
I'm so glad you did. Thank you for being here. And Rick, thank you so much for making yourself available. Great film. I spent the afternoon watching it today, and I'll watch it again. And I think it should be required watching for all students of journalism or politics or democracy or anything else. So good job. Thank you. It can now stream anywhere, right? It's called Strip for Parts.
Yep. Yes, you stream it. Just go to pbs.org or your PBS app, and it's free streaming up until the end of the year. So you have another couple of months.
Great. Thank you both for being here. It's been a great pleasure. This is KSQD Radio, KSQT Prunedale. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Talk of the Bay. I'll be back again next week. And coming up next, it's Ask Dr. Don. Come with your medical questions. But first, it's time for First Person Singular.